And for a few months, they were the only liberated big city in Iraq.
It was. That was May 10th. A truce was negotiated, and part of the truce was that the Americans would stay out of the city indefinitely, that they would not do any patrols anymore. And I went in there on May 10th. They had one last ceremonial patrol that was allowed according to the truce, where they rolled a big armored convoy into the city. They went in, they had a photo op with the mayor, and then they left, and they were allotted 1 hour to do that. And they were in and out in less than an hour's time. And when they rolled away with their embedded reporters in tow, which we watched from the street as they rolled by in the armored vehicles, the entire city erupted into a celebration. There was a victory parade. The people that were guarding the Americans on their patrol came back in and took part, the police and the army officers, in the victory parade. And then that really began several months of liberation in Fallujah, where from that period of May 10 until November 8 of that same year, it was a brief window where it was the only unoccupied city in the country.
And then came the new siege in November.
And then came the new siege. It really, technically the ground portion of that siege was launched on November 8th, but in actuality, you could argue that the siege started before that, because there was a buildup of airstrikes, artillery, shellings in different parts of the city, big airstrikes where at times entire families were being taken out, sometimes 10, 20, 30 people in one airstrike, to really start softening things up. And the military does this also. You can read in their manuals. They'll do that intentionally to try to scare people so that more people will leave the city. And even according to the Pentagon, there were between 30 and 50,000 people that remained in the city. And they rolled tanks in, they took heavy casualties, but then they ended up doing massive damage in the city. They ended up using illegal weapons like cluster bombs and white phosphorus and flechettes and other types of weapons, on top of just ultimately either destroying or severely damaging about 3/4 of the city. And at the end of it, after about 3.5 weeks of really fierce fighting, when things settled down, an Iraqi NGO in the city estimated that about 5,000 people had been killed, and again, the vast majority of them women, children, and civilians. And I couldn't get into the city during that siege because the U.S. had done everything they could to keep people from going inside. They set up very strict security perimeter around, and they started using biometric identification for people, scanning their retinas, fingerprinting all 10 fingers for fingerprints, and issuing people ID codes, and of course not letting any journalists in whatsoever. So what I did is I either stayed in Baghdad or went to the perimeter of Fallujah and was interviewing people as they came out of the city. And in that way, I documented the U.S. using white phosphorus. I didn't know it was white phosphorus at the time, but about a little over a week into the siege, I started hearing different people coming out at different places of the city at different times, again, all of them saying the same thing, that the Americans were dropping these bombs that created massive fire, and if any of it got on you, that it would literally burn you down to the bone. And they were using it so much that people had learned that if you put water on it, it didn't stop the burning, that they literally learned to start using damp mud and then applying that, and that would at least slow it down until they could get to the hospital. And then about a year later, we ended up managing to force the Pentagon to admit that, yes, they did use this restricted weapon. It's against the Geneva Conventions to use this weapon in an area where there might be civilians.
Now, if you read the American media, Fallujah has become like this model city where, things are going well. What is really happening there?
In reality, there's been none of the reconstruction and the money for reconstruction that was promised in the aftermath of the siege happened. None of it, literally. The only reconstruction that's happened has been carried out by people of Fallujah themselves with their own money. To date, there's still tens of thousands of people that are refugees from their homes, even from the April siege, not even talking about the November siege, which there's even more refugees. But still, large areas of the city remain completely destroyed. To this day, there are entire neighborhoods that are still completely leveled. Needless to say, no water, no electricity. One of the Iraqis that I've been still working with doing stories from Iraq lives in Fallujah, and he estimated there about 6 months ago that there was about 80% unemployment in the city, that most of the shops remain closed. Those that are open are doing very little business. Schools are struggling, and there's large health problems, now because so much depleted uranium munitions and so many other illegal types of weapons were used that there's an increased rate in miscarriages with pregnant women, of birth defects, of children being born with really horrible deformities, which is real similar to what happened in southern Iraq after the '91 war, when so much depleted uranium was used that people were being affected by it very badly. So it's a city where some of the Iraqis I've been in touch with there, along with my correspondent, has said when they saw this propaganda in the United States, well, yes, look, things are better in Fallujah now after the siege, and there's more security, and it's so much more quiet. And their comment is, yes, it's more quiet, just like a graveyard is quiet.
There's this weird thing of a very advanced society, the occupier, using high-tech means like biometrics and other stuff to keep the population in a situation where they don't even have vehicles. They have to walk or take, donkeys and carts.
That's exactly right, where it's an interesting paradox where the U.S., with the most advanced military on the planet, goes in and uses satellite weapons and guided weapons and laser-guided weapons and night vision and all of this sort of thing to literally destroy what was the cradle of civilization to a point where in a city like Fallujah, for example, to really completely destroy such an advanced place as Iraq, as far as, a place where we got so much of our banking system and finances and calculus and science and things and arts and literature and things like this, and really turning it back into the Stone Age in so many places.
Talking about reconstruction, the U.S. has spent hundreds of billions of dollars already in Iraq. Where is this money going?
The money's going primarily into the pockets of the corporations that are being paid. One example that I did investigate quite heavily was